There are moments in television history that nobody sees coming. Moments where the cameras are rolling, the audience is settled, the coffee is warm, and everything seems perfectly ordinary. And then, it isn't. What you're about to hear is the story of one of those moments. The day that a woman who built an empire out of kindness, sequins, and mountain music walked onto one of the most combative stages in daytime television and didn't just survive the fire, she became it. This is the story of Dolly Parton, Joy Behar, and the confrontation that left an entire studio speechless, a co-host walking off set, and millions of viewers asking the same question: how did she stay so calm? The View has always been a particular kind of arena. It is a place built on disagreement, on friction, on the crackling electricity of strong personalities colliding in real time. Every morning, millions of Americans tune in not just for the headlines, but for the heat. For the moments when somebody pushes too hard and somebody else pushes back. On the day in question, the studio was buzzing with its familiar pre show energy, lights were being adjusted, microphones were being tested, assistants moved with purpose between dressing rooms and stage wings, and then Dolly Parton arrived. Now, to understand what was about to happen, you have to understand who Dolly Parton is, not just as an entertainer, but as a phenomenon. Here was a woman who had grown up in a one-room cabin in the mountains of Tennessee, one of 12 children with no running water and no floor that didn't creak in the cold. A woman who had turned that poverty, that hunger, that mountain girl longing into one of the most enduring careers in American music history. She had survived the industry's cruelties. She had outlasted its trends. She had written over 3,000 songs, built a theme park, launched a literacy program that would eventually put over 100 million books into the hands of children who might never have held one. She had funded COVID vaccine research. She had quietly, consistently done more for the world than most people in her position ever bothered to attempt. And yet, on this particular morning, none of that would matter to the woman sitting across from her. Dolly settled into the guest chair, her sequin jacket catching the studio lights like 1,000 tiny stars. She smiled at the audience. She smiled at the hosts. She was warm. She was gracious. She was, as she always appeared to be, completely at ease. Joy Behar, however, had a different energy altogether. Those who have watched Joy Behar for long enough know her tells. There is a specific kind of smile she gets. Not quite warmth, not quite welcome, more like the expression of someone who has already decided where the conversation is going and is simply waiting for the moment to begin. On this morning, that smile was present from the very first exchange. She opened with a compliment that wasn't quite one. 50 years in music, Joy remarked, and then in the same breath suggested that perhaps it was time to update the look, the big hair, the sequins. All very 1970s, she said with the particular tone of someone who believes they are being helpful. Dolly's smile remained perfectly in place. She said simply, warmly, without missing a beat, that if something works, why fix it? That her fans seemed to love her just the way she was. It was a graceful answer, a smart one, the kind of answer that closes a door politely. But Joy Behar did not take the exit offered. Instead, she leaned forward in that posture that her viewers knew well, the one that telegraphed she was done with pleasantries and ready for confrontation. She pressed harder. She asked whether Dolly was setting a bad example for young women. All this emphasis on appearance, she said, the plastic surgery, the costumes. Was it really feminist? Across the table, the other hosts shifted in their seats. Whoopi Goldberg, who had seen enough of these moments to recognize the trajectory, shot Joy a warning look. Sarah Haynes tried to redirect with a lighter question. Joy cut her off without hesitation, and then she said the words that would change the temperature of the entire room. She called Dolly Parton a cartoon character. For just a fraction of a second, one almost imperceptible moment, something shifted behind Dolly Parton's eyes. Those who knew her well would have recognized the sign. Her fingers drummed once on her knee. Just once. Lightly. The gesture of a woman who is choosing her words with enormous care. She looked at Joy steadily and said, still sweetly, still warmly, but with something new underneath it, that she had never claimed to be anything other than exactly what she was. That she wrote her own songs. That she ran her own businesses. That she had employed thousands of people over the years, and that if that wasn't serious enough for Joy, Well, that said more about Joy than it did about her. The studio audience murmured their approval. But Joy was not finished. She pressed on with a new accusation, one more personal, more pointed than anything she had thrown yet. She told Dolly on national television in front of a live studio audience that she believed Dolly was a smart woman who had spent her entire career dumbing herself down to appeal to men, that the cutesy, helpless Southern belle act was an insult to women who had fought for real equality, that it was about time someone called her out on it. And then she stopped talking. The studio fell absolutely silent, not the comfortable, expectant silence of an audience waiting for a punchline. A different kind of silence entirely, the kind that fills a room when something has gone too far, when everyone present can feel that a line has been crossed and nobody is quite sure what happens next. The camera operators held their positions, the producers watching from the booth went very still, and Dolly Parton, the woman who had just been told on live television that her entire life's work was a fraud, a manipulation, an embarrassment to her gender, sat perfectly still. She did not raise her voice. She did not look away. And then, softly, she began to speak. The first thing she asked was simple. She asked Joy how many literacy programs she had started, how many children she had put through college, how many hospitals she had helped fund. Joy's expression shifted. Something flickered across her face that had not been there before, a trace of uncertainty. She said that wasn't the point she was making. And Dolly Parton, calm as still water, warm as southern summer with absolute precision, told her that it was exactly the point. She said, while you've been sitting behind this desk tearing other women down, I've been out there building women up. And then, methodically, beautifully, she laid it out. The imagination library. Over 100 million books given away to children who might not otherwise have had them. The thousands of jobs created, most of them for women. The young female artists mentored and guided. The hospital funding. The quiet, consistent, unglamorous work of actually making people's lives better. But none of that mattered, Dolly observed, because Joy didn't like her hair. The audience was transfixed. She wasn't done. She told Joy that real feminism was about women supporting other women, not tearing them down because they made different choices. That real feminism was about judging women by their actions, not their appearance. And that real feminism was about having the courage to be exactly who you are, regardless of what bitter, judgmental people might say about you. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Bitter. Joy's composure cracked visibly. Her face flushed. She denied it with the kind of speed that tends to confirm the thing being denied. She insisted she wasn't bitter. And Dolly Parton tilted her head ever so slightly, like someone studying something that had just become very interesting, and asked, very quietly, "Aren't you?" What followed in the next several minutes was something rarely seen on daytime television. Not a fight, not a shouting match, not the kind of confrontation the View's producers might have been hoping for. It was something quieter and more devastating than any of that. It was a woman methodically, graciously, completely dismantling another woman's position, while never once raising her voice. Joy tried to press forward. She called Dolly's image manipulative. She said it was dishonest. She said it wasn't authentic. And Dolly responded with a laugh, a genuine one, warm and full, and told her what authentic actually looked like. Growing up poor in the Tennessee mountains, working every single day of her life towards something better, making deliberate choices about how to present herself because those choices opened doors, never pretending to be anything other than a country girl who loved music and loved people. And then she asked Joy, very gently, very pointedly, what was not authentic about sitting behind a desk throwing stones at other women because their choices made her uncomfortable. Joy doubled down. She insisted Dolly was still selling an image that told women they had to look a certain way to succeed. Dolly turned it back on her with surgical precision. She said, "No, Joy. That's what you're doing. You're telling women that if they choose to embrace their femininity, if they choose to wear makeup and pretty clothes, then they're somehow less than. You're saying that to be taken seriously, women have to look and act like men. That's not feminism. That's just another kind of prison." The audience murmured, then grew louder, then fell quiet again. The other hosts were watching the exchange like witnesses at a scene they couldn't quite believe was happening, and then Dolly said something that made the room go still again. she noted, calmly and clearly, that Joy had invited her onto the show to talk about her new album and her charity work. That from the moment she had sat down, Joy had done nothing but attack her appearance, her choices, and her character. And she asked, with genuine incredulity, whether that was what Joy called professional journalism. Joy had no answer for that. She shifted in her chair. She tried to claim she was asking tough questions, and Dolly very quietly explained what tough questions actually were: policy, substance, things that mattered. And then she said the word that would define the entire exchange. Attacking a woman's appearance and calling her a cartoon character isn't journalism, it's bullying. The studio was so quiet you could hear the hum of the camera equipment. Joy tried once more. She accused Dolly of twisting her words. She said she never meant any of it the way it had come across, and Dolly, without a single tremor in her voice, listed every word back. Cartoon character. Barbie doll. Setting a bad example. Playing into male fantasies. Building a career on fake and dishonest foundations. Those are your words, Joy. Own them. What happened next was something nobody in that studio was prepared for. Joy Behar, veteran host, seasoned television personality, a woman who had spent decades as one of the sharpest voices on daytime television, stood up abruptly. She pulled off her microphone, and she said, her composure entirely gone, her voice shaking with a fury she could no longer contain, that she wouldn't sit there and be lectured by someone who thought being a living doll was an achievement. She called Dolly a washed-up country singer. The gasp from the studio audience was audible. Even the camera operator seemed to flinch. Dolly Parton did not flinch. She simply shook her head, slowly, almost sadly, and said, "And there you go again, Joy. When you can't win an argument on merit, you resort to personal attacks." Joy stood there for a long moment, trembling, searching for something to say, finding nothing. Then she declared the interview an ambush. Then she turned and walked off the set, pulling out her earpiece as she went, the cameras tracking her exit before cutting back to the four remaining hosts who looked as though they had just watched something fall from a great height. Whoopi Goldberg cleared her throat. She began to apologize, and Dolly Parton, smoothing her skirt, adjusting her jacket, composed as if she had just been discussing the weather, interrupted her gently. She said there was no need to apologize, that sometimes people show you exactly who they are, and you just have to accept it and move on. Then she asked, with a warm smile, whether anyone wanted to talk about her new album. The studio audience erupted. In the hours and days that followed, the clip made its way across the internet with the speed that only truly extraordinary moments achieve. People watched it once, then again. They forwarded it to their friends with messages that said, "You have to see this." They posted it with captions about grace under pressure, about dignity, about what it actually looks like when someone refuses to be diminished. The conversation that followed was as much about Joy Behar as it was about Dolly Parton, about the kind of criticism that disguises itself as feminism while doing the very thing feminism was supposed to prevent, about the difference between challenging a woman's ideas and attacking her identity, about what it means to sit behind a platform built for discourse and use it instead as a weapon. But perhaps the more interesting conversation, the one that lingered longest, was about Dolly herself, about how she had done it, because she had done it without anger, without cruelty, without the kind of scorched earth retaliation that the moment might have invited and perhaps even justified. She had simply, calmly, methodically, thoroughly told the truth about her work, about her values, about the difference between the image people projected onto her and the woman she actually was. She had let the record speak, and then she had let Joy Behar speak, and in doing so, she had given the audience everything they needed to draw their own conclusions. There is a particular kind of power in that, not the loud power of someone who wins by overpowering, but the quieter, more enduring power of someone who wins by being so completely, unassailably themselves that there is simply nothing left to attack. Dolly Parton grew up with nothing. No money. No connections. No guarantee that any of it would ever amount to anything more than a few songs sung in a small church in the mountains of Tennessee. What she had, what she built everything else upon, was an absolute, unshakable certainty about who she was. And here is what she understood, perhaps earlier and more clearly than most, that the surest armor against those who want to diminish you is simply to refuse to be diminished, not with aggression, not with retaliation, but with the quiet, steel spined confidence of someone who has already made peace with exactly who they are. Joy Behar came to that interview looking to expose a contradiction. What she found instead was a woman with no contradictions left to expose. And that, in the end, is the most disarming thing a person can be completely, irrevocably themselves.